lights, camera, and action. So first off, lights. Why do we need lights underwater? And this is an important thing. First off, water is denser than air. You think, well, yeah, okay, but how much? It's 784 times denser than air. How much is that? 784 times. And yes, there'll be a test. I'll be asking this later, really. And there's a reason that's important, because people say, well, I can do the other things. I don't need, regular lights and I don't need to bring lights with me underwater. Yes, you do, and here's why. So if you look at the chart on the left, it shows the penetration difference of different colors of light. And if you look at this, you notice the first thing that drops out is red, and then you lose yellow. Well, then you lose orange, then yellow, then green. By the time you're down at 100 feet, there is nothing but blue. I mean, it's bluer than blue. And to see just how much it changes up, even up at the surface, look at a Coke can right here to the right. You can see one that is just at 0 feet down where it gets all the light. Just 10 feet, you've lost a lot of the red. And by the time you get down to 20 feet, there's almost no red left. And even the same with the sun-kissed can just underneath it. So by 20 feet, you've lost all the red and the orange doesn't look orange anymore. So you need to bring your own light. Some people might say, well, I've heard you can get these special red filters and correct things. And that works to a point. It works actually to about 20 feet. And after that, you're really on your own. You've got to bring light with you. So what do you bring with you? You have some kind of camera. In my case, I have some strobes that I attach to that camera. And as far as the light goes, it doesn't have to be the strobes. You can bring, you need special underwater strobes because the ones that are built into small cameras are just not that strong. So you need underwater strobes that are very strong. They're immensely powerful, but they're expensive. So heads up on that. You can also use video lights, but beware because they will blind fellow divers. Occasionally you'll see someone who's not really paying attention when they're filming things, and they'll want to shoot you with their video lights, and they'll bring them up and you are totally blinded. You can't see anything. It's like staring into the headlights. So here's just some quick samples of the things you see, like the strobes like I use on my camera, these CNC YSD2s. They're kind of pricey, as I said, just shy of $700, and I still use another video light underwater just as a focus light, because once you get down to say 70 or 80 feet, it's dark enough that there's not enough light there for the camera to focus quickly on its own. You need to supply extra light just so the camera can focus, and then it fires the strobe so you can actually see what you're looking at. So how do you protect your camera? There are some cameras that don't need an enclosure, but the majority of them need some kind of enclosure, something to protect all of its delicate circuitries and things. So the reason for that is, your camera just, saltwater and electronics, they do not do well together. And so you need to have something to protect the camera, and also for translating the type of electronics that normally the camera works with for the strobes to the type of strobes that are used for underwater photography. So in addition to being an enclosure for the camera, there's some electronics inside there that also translate all the what are called TTL signals. And that means through the lens metering. It allows you to point the camera at something, it'll fire the strobe, and as soon as enough lights come back to the camera, then it'll cut off the light coming into the camera and cut off the strobe, so you get just the right amount of light. So as we go down, the question is, you look at all this stuff that I've got and say, do you need a digital SLR to capture great pictures underwater? And the answer is no. There's a couple different options you have for yourself. At the low end of the spectrum, you can start out with a basic point and shoot. This is a sample of Fujifilm camera. You can buy it at Costco for $140. This camera it's small and simple, but it's full featured. It's great for available light. For larger objects, and you can use it for macro photography down to any depth you want. The thing is, the strobe that's built into it is not that strong, so you're really limited to about a foot or maybe 2 feet away from the camera to be able to light things up. So if you want to take a picture of small things, shrimp, nudibranchs, little guys on the reef, whatever they are, as long as you can get within about a foot or two of them, you can use a camera like this. But anything that's bigger than that or further away, you're just not going to be able to put out enough light to really light it up well. The color will be shifted towards the blue. So it's still great for macro photography. The advantages are you can use it for available light. It's a great camera for above water. It fits nicely into your BC pocket, which my camera does not. And the built-in enclosure is good to about 82 feet. So you're not going to take it on a deep dive. And the optics are not as nice as some of the other more expensive cameras, but for an entry-level camera, it's terrific. So the next step up from that, then there's a number of different simple cameras. There are some point and shoots, and they can be anywhere from 200 to about 800 in that range. Some are a little less expensive, and the enclosures can be anywhere from about 100, 150 to $400. They're full-featured cameras. They still don't have replaceable lenses for the most part, but they have one lens that'll work well. The enclosure that they have works well and gives you a little bit more range. With the strobe will be able to go maybe 2 or 3 feet. You can, if you're in an area where you have available light, and that would be less than about 30 or 40 feet, you can take pretty nice pictures with that of anything there. But once you get to where it's darker and it's all blue, where you're adding the light back to the image, then you're limited to just a few feet away from you to get a really nice picture. Like I said, you can use video lights and they will work just fine, but you're carrying around some lights that are going to be on all the time. Then stepping up from that, you can go whole. And then, and I do want to point out with a camera like this, a point and shoot, you can find point and shoots that give you very high quality. They've got good lenses on them and really have a great picture. As you take a kind of a big jump when you get to a digital SLR, one of the advantages, you're actually looking through the lens. There's a mirror inside the camera that covers up the sensor. So when it's not taking the picture, you're actually looking through and seeing exactly what you're going to get on the image. The advantages they have over some of the point and shoots, and this used to be more true than it is now, but the speed of the shutter and the focus and the recycle for the flash is very short. So you can take picture after picture. Also, the lenses that are available for them are very high quality. They don't have what's called chromatic distortion, which would normally mean at the edges of the lens, you'll see reds and blues shift a little bit. I mean, and this is a subtle thing. You'll see it in a couple pixels at the edge of the image. You can get very nice pieces of glass. There's interchangeable lenses, and you can add very bright strobes. I will point out you can add the bright strobes to a point and shoot camera just to get more light. And I did that for quite a few years. These tend to have much better sensors on them for the camera sensor. And with that, you get extreme light sensitivity. So you don't need that much light to take the picture, but you have a lot more light available. So what it means, you can set up the strobes and make them very wide and be able to take pictures that are 10, 15, even 20 feet away. Generally, there's no depth limit. And when I say that, you can go to about 300 feet, which is deeper than I'm ever planning to go diving. So you're good. The disadvantages on the side is they're expensive. The cameras run anywhere from a really basic SLR is like $500 on up to the top of the line Canon be $6,500. The enclosures for the less expensive, like the Icolite ones, might be $750 to about $1,000, and then some of the metal ones, like from CNC that's pictured here, they're milled out of a single piece of metal, and they'll be $3,500 to $4,000 in there. The lenses that you have can be very expensive. They can be $500 or $1,000, and they can go to several $1,000s if you get the higher quality lens or get a larger aperture lens. The other disadvantage is it's large and it's heavy. It can be neutrally buoyant, but it's still a 20-pound thing you're moving around and muscling with you. And also it means you're restricted to get into small places. So if you have something like, say, a selfie stick that you use with your GoPro, yes, you can get into places you can never get into easily with this, but you can use a small camera like I showed at first, like that Fujifilm camera, and get into small places. Last is kind of a relatively recent entry, which is the mirrorless camera. These are not very different than the digital SLRs and what they can do, but there's no line of sight through the lens. Everything goes to the sensor, and then the sensor goes to a screen on the back of the camera. In some cases, there's a separate viewfinder that you look through, but it's still not going through the lens. It's going through an electronic version of things. So it's slightly delayed. There's like a frame or two delay, and you say, well, how long is that? It's about 15 milliseconds. So that can be a little bit of time if you're talking about taking a picture, and I'll explain why that's an issue in a little bit. Same thing with the mirrorless cameras. They're They have interchangeable lenses, very bright strobes available. They're extremely light sensitive, no depth limit. They're somewhat more compact, but really almost as big as the SLRs. So here's a disclaimer. I'm kind of a Canon fanboy. Most of the things pictured here were Canon cameras. I've used a Canon since I was in high school photography class. Nikon makes an excellent camera. I'm not dissing on that at all. There's also great cameras from Fujifilm, Panasonic, CNC, Olympus, and Sony. And you can find out about all these from websites like B&H Photo and Backscatter. If you want to go talk to somebody locally, Ludic over at Dive and Photo is very helpful. He set me up with my camera system, and it can be an ordeal to set up a camera system because you have to match the lenses you're using if you get a high-end thing with the type of enclosure that you have, and there's certain lenses that work and certain ones that don't. So I'm going to stop at this point for questions. So are there any questions on the chat window, Kelly, or I don't have that up?
Let's see. Ron Brimmer just asked, are there mirrorless ones more durable than regular DSLRs?
Not really. I mean, there is the thing that there's no moving parts inside of a mirrorless camera. In a regular SLR, there's a mirror that flips up out of the way while you're taking the picture. So just for a brief instant, flips up out of the way, it takes the picture, and then puts it back down so the image goes through the viewfinder. So you have one less moving part and one less thing to wear out. Any other questions before I go on? Okay, well, I'll keep on to the next section.
And that I can see.
Okay, cool. So when you get all this stuff together, you look like a bit of a sea monster because you've got a focus light in the center and you've got your big strobes off to the side. In this particular case, they see this cable running between the strobes, the little curly Q thing. What that does is that goes to the enclosure and that ties into the camera and actually ties to the TTL system. So that allows it to just put out the amount of light it needs and no more. And then the float you see on the arms between that and the volume that's inside the camera case keeps the whole thing neutrally buoyant.
Scott, can you talk about how the pictures will be used on a tablet, photo, tablet, TV, or printing?
I typically use them mostly on the screen. I have a 4K screen. I look at it at home for various things. I occasionally print them to high resolution. When you take a picture, like on a digital SLR, typically you're getting a thing that at a minimum is 3 by 4,000 pixels. I think it's more like 4,300 by 5,600 pixels. So you can blow it up to a poster size and not see any distortion or pixelation of the image. The other thing that happens is you can have, oh, there's a whole bunch here in the chat window here. Let me see if.
Got another question when you're ready.
Let's see. We did have someone present about the Sea Life underwater camera with the flash, and it's supposed to be an amazing thing. I have not used them. I do know they're out there, and I believe the Sea Life camera is actually is similar to the Fujifilm camera as far as the main camera itself is good to about 80 feet. And then it's actually inside another enclosure that's good to 300. So that way, in the odd case that the enclosure were to leak, you have another enclosure that the camera itself is. Rick Valasek asked about flood insurance. And for my setup, I spend some ridiculous amount. I think it's like $300 a year for flood insurance. And the flood insurance covers anything that will happen to the camera and will replace the full value of it. And that's available through a company that I think I found online that is through the Dan website. And
there are multiple Sea Lifes. Some of them are all enclosed.
Yeah, there's versions of the Sea Life that's all enclosed. There is one version that we had someone come and talk to the club about, I think about a year or two ago, that has a basic camera kind of like the Fujifilm one, so it's good on its own, and then it goes inside another enclosure for deeper work.
Well, the reason I know is because I have one, and the video in the background was filmed by it.
Oh, okay. So you get all this stuff, as you can see, navigating your way around can be an issue. And in my case, you might say, well, what's up with the pink gloves? and I need to explain those because people say, why do you have pink gloves? Guy, you know, what's the deal? So these pink gloves are leather, and I've seen people cut themselves all the way to the bone off jagged edges on a wreck. If you climb around on a wreck and you're trying to get to your spot, your place you want to take your picture, it's very easy to bump up against something that can cut you very deeply. And it's important to have leather gloves to move around that. Even though technically they say don't wear gloves in Cozumel, bring them with you. So we know who you, what's it say here? So we know who you are. Yes, you can tell who I am because I'm the only person with pink
Yes,
gloves.
Matt. Oh,
And
yeah.
then, yeah, Matt Britt did that 3 years ago. I had to go to the hospital. He had a cut from, we were on one of the wrecks, and it went all the way through the muscle to the bone. It was really nasty.
He was so proud of that.
Yes, he was. I don't want to take away from that, but it's no fun. So, I mean, even those things, just a simple piece of leather is enough to keep you from really getting cut up.
Oh, Mayhem did it in the same place too.
Who did?
Mayhem.
Oh, okay. So you do look, as I say, look a little bit like a sea monster with this. The nice part is the strobes and all are on arms that you can move around, so you can position them to get just the lighting effect you want. So with this, what else do you need to know? A couple things actually. Before I talk about depth of field, when you're using a strobe, something to be aware of. What? I'm back in your
Second in coolness only to a shark bite.
shark bite. Yeah, didn't look very cool, but okay. I think the shark bite would be better.
Picture's pretty good.
So when you take a picture with a strobe, you're actually setting the shutter speed to a fixed amount, and then the amount of light you're getting is mostly being controlled by the strobe itself. So when you do that, now you've cut off one of the controls of the camera. So now you have focus, which the camera mostly takes care of on its own, and you have depth of field, which is controlled by the aperture setting. So basically you've gone from lots of automatic things and manual controls you can have to pretty much now you've got, you know, the strength of the strobe and the depth of field, and that's it. And then where you want to position the camera. So with depth of field, what can you do? Depth of field is controlled by the aperture, the opening that the camera makes. If that's a really, really tight spot, that'll be like the bottom picture where you can see everything is in focus, but very little light gets in. In the top picture, it's a maximally wide open lens, so you know, the aperture is all the way opened. And then you get a very narrow depth of field. So that's like this, you know, when you look through the water column, it's a very small amount that'll be in focus. And let's look at an example of that. So here we got this cute little puffer fish and some grass and stuff. And so with this, just his face and just the eyes are in sharp focus. Everything else is kind of blurry and in the background. So it really brings your attention to that one spot. And just to drive the point home, I have a second picture here that's, you know, above ground, but you get the idea. Where the seagull, the backlit, is sharp focus, silhouette, and everything else is kind of blurry and out of focus. So it just lets you focus on just one portion of the image. On the other hand, if you have a big area you want to keep in focus, then you want to have a tight aperture, very small opening, and that'll allow everything from this right in the foreground to all the way back to be in focus. So on a wide angle shot like this, you can make sure everything you see is in focus. The coral head, the sunlight above, all the little fish in the background, the guy in the foreground, and so on. So how does this all work? Let me just explain, because some people say, well, is this, you know, how much work is it to go through all this? The night before, we're looking at the boat, but before you get to the boat, you spend a lot of time taking your camera apart. You go through each and every O-ring, and in the case of the big camera, you've got a big O-ring for the big part of the enclosure. You have O-rings on each of the strobes. And there's also O-rings on the connectors going to the strobes. And you re-grease all of those things. You put the whole thing together. You make sure there's new batteries in the enclosure. There's new batteries in the leak detector in the enclosure that'll, in case a drop or two of water get in, it lights up and lets you know you should surface quickly. And all those things have to be set, and then you do a test shot with your camera and then turn everything back off and set it aside. And then the next day you have your camera sitting in some kind of a bag or attached to you. You hop off the boat, they hand it over to you, say in Cozumel like here, and you go down and you find something to take a picture of. And if you get the framing right, you get a nice dramatic shot, and then you can move on from there. But is just a shot of a fish enough? You know, that can be a little bit boring. People like to see their friends. But before we talk about friends, let's talk about shutter delay. Remember I said earlier that you have a you have some of the less expensive cameras, there'll be a long delay between the time you click on the camera and what actually takes the picture. So how does that affect you? You get a lot of this. You get fishtail, or in this case, sea lion tail. I took many pictures like this before I got a digital SLR. Where I thought I had the sea lion was coming right by me. I was going to take that picture. I was so proud of that. Got it all set up, and he came by at about 25 miles an hour under the water. And I took the picture, and I got his feet. So that's what you get. So be aware of that. That's one of the main things that as you move up the ladder in the different types of cameras, from some of the point and shoots to some of the other ones, you'll have a long delay in between the time when you push the button and when it actually shoots. You can reduce that time by holding the button halfway down, and that'll cause the camera to sample the light and focus. So when you push down the rest of the way, it'll reduce the amount of time it takes to take the picture. But once you go to that and get take the picture right away, now you can get to pictures, they're crisp, you see everything, it's frozen in time. You can catch sea lions doing all kinds of crazy stuff, posing for you, right in front of you, dodging you, running through you, nuzzling at your ear, whatever you want. Sea lions are like dogs. They're kind of like golden retrievers. They're great.
Peter says, wow.
So going back to taking a picture of all kinds of stuff, you can, let me see if I'm way off script here. Where did I go? So when you go down to, say, in Cozumel, you'll find all kinds of coral heads with sponges on them. And the nice part about having a nice wide angle lens and some good light is you can capture all that red and the orange. Remember back to the orange soda can and the Coke can, all those reds and all those oranges, if you were not bringing your own light with you, you would not get this picture. You can put a red filter on that'll cut down the amount of blue, and that'll balance things out, usually down to about 20 or 25 feet. But after that point, there's just not enough red light available to you that penetrates that low to get a picture, or to get a good picture. You'll get one that'll look funny where the reds are all bleached out. So once you've done your job, you got your camera, you send it down, found something cool to take a picture of, you say, well, I really like to give some sense of scale. So you need divers for a sense of scale, because people know about the right size of what divers are. And with that sense of scale, now things take on a whole different look. You know that this is a hole through a wreck. You know that about how big that hole is because of the size of the diver, and you can really see what things are. Certain things, if you take a picture of them, like say a giant black sea bass, is a fish that's very proportional. And from a ways away, you wouldn't know that that thing's not a 2-inch guppy until you get next to it and you realize it's a 600-pound fish and it's about the size of a VW. So you need a sense of scale. That'll let you know how big these stalactites are, because there's a diver right there letting you know just how big they are. Well, in this case, you won't know, or you'll know how big the sub is because you can see people in it, and you know exactly what size the thing is. People they do two things. It makes people more interested in the picture, so try to get them in your pictures when you can, and it also gives people a sense of scale. Sometimes you don't always get that, so you get just a cool picture like this of a night shot of this octopus. Or other things, it's hard to get a sense of scale. Like this little crab is from Cozumel, and I think the whole length of its body is about the width of my pinky nail. It's very small, and there's no, or a moose. I'm trying to think who. Oh, that's from Walter Marty. Okay, yes. Yeah, so a giant black sea bass can be about the size of a moose. That's true. But this thing is tiny, and so the only way you can tell what's going on is realize that these little hairs down here are actually pieces of algae fuzz, and it gives you an idea of just how tiny this thing is. But you need to add something to your shot to give you that sense of scale, and try to set it up so you're telling a story. For example, in this shot, you see a whale shark, and it's not until you look at it for a second, notice off to the top left, they're a little bit faded because the viz was not that great, but here are two divers, and it lets you realize just how big this fish is. And they're not distant away, they're only like 10 feet back from the tail of this thing. That's a big fish. So you need divers to give you a sense of scale. And when you get all this, then you can decide it's time to go and catch the beginning of this was catch a turtle. So I think this is Karen, and I'm not sure who's next to Karen.
It's John.
I'm not sure. I don't think you can hear my bubbles because I didn't have the right audio thing set up. But you try to get in and get your camera position just right as I'm trying to get here, and hopefully you're not being photo bombed by one of the dive masters. But if you eventually get past all that and get up close to them, well, one, with the person in the frame, you know just how big that turtle is. You can also, here, let me get to the next shot. You can also go and get up close to the turtle and get a nice shot of him alone from different angles, or just get a person in the frame so you get a size of how big the turtle is. So now I'm open for more questions. What did I do here? I'll watch the chat window, or you could take yourself off mute and say hi.
Hey, Scott, this is Rick. Can you tell people when they're talking to them about why they shouldn't assemble their camera into an enclosure in the nice air-conditioned room in Cozumel and then bring it outside to the boat?
Oh yeah, there's that. Well, what can happen is you get the moist air that's inside the room, well, also cold air inside the room that's somewhat moist, and as soon as you get inside well, let's see if I get this right, it winds up condensing inside inside your enclosure, which is bad. It leads to that all that moisture that was in the air cools down once you get into the water, and then can condense on the important electronics that are helping your flash run.
And the lenses for hours.
Yeah, if it can take a long time to get the lens right ever again. I mean, basically you have to let it sit in the sun to bake out all the moisture if it doesn't get moisture in. The lenses are a whole different thing. I mean, on the DSLRs, you wind up spending more money on the lenses than the camera. When I first bought my camera, I didn't realize that the lenses were quite so expensive, and so I wound up uh, sort of waiting an extra couple months to save up a little bit more money so I could get the various wide angles and things that I needed, because they are quite expensive.
So Conrad says he puts his outside during breakfast so there's no fogging. And Dr. Debbie would like to know, can you talk about what you do in post regarding editing?
Let's see. Even though I've spent a lifetime, in a previous lifetime, like 25 years ago, I actually made post-production software, but I don't think that's because you take so many shots, that's not a good idea to have to do a lot of treatment on the pictures. You can use things like Lightroom or Photoshop, but to be honest, there's not enough hours in the day to go through Photoshop with each individual picture. So I've been using an old program called Picasa, which is like the really pared down version of Lightroom. Picasa happens to work with raw pictures, so it lets you use the full original resolution coming off the sensor. And that can be a huge win to go through your pictures quickly. One of the other things that is very time consuming is going through and trying to tag what's in your pictures. I've actually spent the last almost 2 years on this now. And originally I'd hoped to be done by the end of last year, but I'm still working on it. It'll probably be the end of this year. I have an app that runs as a website, and also I'm working on it so it runs on Android and iPhones, and will identify all the pictures all the fish that are in the pictures. The advantage to that is when you're going through and you're trying to look through all your pictures and find the best shot of a parrotfish or the best turtle, it can take an immense amount of time to go through your pictures and tag what's in what. And that's not something that's currently available. So I've been working on that for a while. Hopefully that'll be out shortly. Is either as a standalone thing or a plugin for Lightroom, which is a very popular program used to edit and do post-production on things. Let's see, leak detectors. Let me answer that from Bill. So there's a leak detector in my camera that has two little electrodes at the bottom of the camera. So in the case that a drop or two forms somewhere, a light turns on and lets me know I should surface right away. The other thing you can do is I think it's about $500 for the add-on, you can actually suck a vacuum on the camera. And that way you can put it under the same amount of pressure it would be in by being, say, 80 or 100 feet down, and verify that all the seals are good before you go to the water. And let's see, and how do I keep my pictures organized? Picasa has a number of ways of doing that, though it's not the best for tagging things. Lightroom has some better stuff, but still doesn't have recognition pieces built in it yet. Yeah, let's see. Any looked at detectors? Yes, Google. Let's see. Jim Patterson said Google did kill Picasa, but I still have a copy and it still runs nicely on Windows. I'm an ancient dinosaur Windows 7 on my Windows box because I really despise Windows 10, and was working fine on my Mac until an upgrade of about 6 months ago, and then stopped working. So it is sort of dead. Amen. Okay. It's there. Yeah, well, it actually was nice from the point of view. It does a lot of basic things, and it's very fast and works with raw pictures. But Lightroom seems like the way to go forward. There's other, I actually, Bonnie Pelnar spends a whole day talking about ways to organize your pictures. I test my case, it says here, Jean-Yves says, I test my case with toilet paper inside before the dive trip, which, I mean, you can put something inside and you can put something inside the enclosure just to see it and then take it down and then make sure it doesn't leak. But you just don't know from one dive to the next if it's going to leak. And so that's why being able to pull a vacuum on it and test it is a nice thing. Jim Patterson says Darktable is a free program for organizing pictures, which I didn't know about before. And thank you, Jim. That's good to know. And I think that might be the end of my slides.
Hey,
Yes.
Scott.
Yes.
Hey,
Hey, Ron.
my comment earlier about how you view what you take really, I think, regards to what kind of a camera you end up with. Like I use a little Canon point and shoot that was about $250, and it has a separate case. I use it primarily just for showing my photos on a tablet. I don't use it for. So the kind of camera you buy really equates to what your end result wants to be. If you want to do professional, or you just want to have big photos in your house, or you just want to view them on a phone or on a tablet, I think makes a difference in what kind of a camera setup you buy.
That is very true. I mean, I have to say it might only be 2 or 3 pictures a year that actually blow up to any reasonable size and put on the wall. Harmony Solo, I guess, commented that you can also use desiccants, which are little silica gel packs you put inside the camera, which will absorb extra moisture inside. That I forgot. I used to use those in my point and shoot, and that's a great way to keep the housing from fogging up. I forgot about those. Thank you.